Hashtag never alone with Joe and Mark.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Hashtag Never Alone Episode 7, our World Mental Health Day webinar. I am your lived experience host, Joe Ambridge.
And I'm psychotherapist and relationship counsellor and Joe's co-host, Mark Fielding.
And today, as you probably know, is World Mental Health Day. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what World Mental Health Day is. It's an international day for global mental health education, awareness and advocacy against social stigma. It was first celebrated in 1992 at the initiative of the World Federation for Mental Health, a global mental health organization with members and contacts in more than 150 countries. As you guys know, we are a mental health podcast, so we're all for days that help promote mental health and try and get rid of the stigma. We are currently sitting on 989 plays, so we're very near to 1,000. We did 20 episodes in season 1. I'm just going to go through the episodes we did and the guests that we had on. We are joined by some guest speakers who I will introduce shortly. So the first episode we did was Men and Mental Health, which was with Paul Granger. Anxiety, which was with Victoria Vanstone. Depression, which was with Tom Adam. Bipolar, which was with Teresa de Pasquale. Postnatal depression, which was with Sandy Rivers. Mind Fitness, which was with the founders of the Fitness Clover Line, Reese and Ryan Tinson. PTSD, which was with Joe Yates, who unfortunately was supposed to be joining us but isn't joining us. I haven't heard anything from her. ADHD with Jeremy Britton. BPD, which was my episode that I did, and I spoke about my BPD, and I will discuss about that as well in this webinar. HSPs with Mark Fielding, who's also joining us, as you know, he's our co-host. Suicide, which was with Daryl Green, who I will be introducing, who's joining us today. He will talk a little bit about the episode that he did. Men and Mental Health Revisited, which was with Will Humphreys, who will be chatting about the episode he was on. We did an interview with Drew Wakely from the Midnight Beast. OCD, which was with JL Keez. The impact of suicide and causes with Amelia Olson. Grief and Loss, which was with Richard Harris. Insomnia, which was with Sophie Abel, who was supposed to be joining us, but unfortunately isn't. Trauma, which was with Annette Densham. Schizophrenia, which was with Alana May Mitchell. And Q&A, which we had with Jordan Harbison. I also want to say massive congratulations to Jordan on the news of her baby girl, who she is expected next year. So I will now introduce our guests in episode order. So our first guest who is joining us is Daryl Green, who joined us for the suicide episode. Hi, Daryl. Sorry, just unmute yourself. Hi, Daryl.
Good evening, Joe. Good evening, Mark.
Thank
you for having me on with the other guests. It's an absolute pleasure. A very important day.
Yeah. So what does World Mental Health Day mean to you?
I think the number one thing I would say it is the destigmatization and letting people know it's okay not to be okay, and seeing more resources put into the area of mental health. And I think COVID-19 has brought that to the forefront for literally everyone on the planet.
Yeah. And the episode you did, which episode number was that, and the topic?
It was episode 11, and I spoke about suicide, and I had a very unique position, having joined the police at 18, attended suicides, completed coroner's reports, spoke to the family and friends, and then suffering a horrific workplace injury, being shot in the face and shoulder on duty, and then having my own struggle with mental health and suicide. But I actually drew on what I knew about suicide from my professional role, which helped me to keep going and ask for professional help.
Yeah. Mark, you got any questions?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking back to the episode now, and wow, I mean, what an inspiration. I think I said that. I mean, I'd say that actually about many, all of our guests. But really, I mean, what you went through. I mean, there's a video that I think people can watch, isn't there, too, which really explains, the incident and I guess the length of the recovery, which is understandable, and the recovery being both physical and mental, and then I guess the leading into your work as an ambassador. I wonder whether you could tell us a bit more about well, perhaps we could maybe start at the reverse. Could I ask you a bit more about your work as an ambassador?
Yes. So my next piece of ambassador work for Lifeline, which is a huge privilege, is I'm participating in a run here, Bridge to Brisbane, and that's to raise funds for the Lifeline team who are participating in it. And there is a story going out on social media very shortly, Lifeline, about me being an ambassador and my story and in relation to suicide. And so they asked me just recently, would you take some photographs of you out running? And fortunately, I run every day, and I had the Lifeline jersey, and it was something that I love to do, and it helps me mentally, and obviously it's good for me physically, and helps to encourage others, and plus raising funds for Lifeline. So it's win-wins all round.
Yeah, and kind of really, transmuting, all of the pain that you went through into helping others, which I always think is such a wonderful thing. I mean, your work for Lifeline must be helping so many people.
Yeah, I'm a keynote speaker, and when I work for Lifeline, though, it's completely pro bono, and that's just my giving back. Because there's a lot of people out there. I had people to pick up the phone and speak to, be they family, friends, or professionals. And I was from a perspective of police officers. A lot of people slip through the cracks, and they end up having no one. And Lifeline's there 24/7.
It's very true about a lot of people in mental health. It goes ignored sometimes, and especially people that are quite scared to speak up about, worried about being judged and seen differently. I definitely agree with you there that people do go unnoticed, and it is quite sad that it's still a thing that people are too scared to talk about mental health with fear of being judged. Can you just tell us a little bit about your film? It's Twice Shot, am I right saying that again?
Yes, so twiceshot.com is my website, and on there is a short film. And what happened was, through Professional Speakers Australia, I was introduced to a director, and he thought, wow, that's sort of pretty amazing story about what I went through, getting shot on duty, getting out the car, going after the gunman, my award for my bravery. But then the long journey, it was 17 major surgical procedures, over 2 reconstructions of my mouth, and 7 years after shooting when this was finalised, and probably my mental health really only got really back on track by 2010 after a 10-year battle with the Queensland Department of Justice in relation to criminal compensation. And so it's been quite a journey. And he was so taken with it, he just wanted to do a film to raise awareness for suicide prevention. It's roughly in Australia, it's double the amount of people take their lives each year compared to those who are unfortunately killed on our roads. But it's not a figure that's widely known. And so he made the film. It was introduced to Lifeline, and they loved it. And in 2018, an event was hosted by our police minister here in Brisbane, Queensland, Mark Ryan, MP, and it launched the film. It raised funds for Lifeline, and I was announced as an ambassador. So that has been an incredible honour.
It's a very powerful film. I've watched it a few times and listened to the audio. It's such a good film and so powerful. And the fact that you went through that trauma and you are where you are now, and you've kind of overcome those obstacles and got back to a place where you're helping others is so inspirational. What made you want to come on the podcast and chat with us about your story?
Well, suicide is something people do not like to speak about. And I know just from myself, nobody wanted to speak about the shooting. So it became the 800-pound gorilla in the room. So I was going through my second reconstruction. I'd taken up a new position at the police academy. I had a plate in my mouth. I had braces, and I was suffering physically and psychologically, and it was ignored. And it wasn't out of these people being they was out being misinformed. They were worried they would say the wrong thing, so they didn't want to say anything at all.
Yeah, which
and
I guess.
So I wanted to talk about I wanted to talk a little bit about suicide, and the point that I got to, the key reason that I continued. I talked about that day I was facing the second reconstruction. I was running across a bridge, put both hands on the railing. I look over. It's just gone through my head. I can jump and it will all be over. But literally, I knew, being a police officer, I've just thought, hold on, what happens to families? What happens to friends? I've seen that. I can't do it to my mum and dad. And so my decision to live wasn't for me, it was for my parents. And so I continued running, and with no light at the end of the tunnel. But I'm so grateful that I did, because there is light at the end of the tunnel. And I've still have some low points, but generally life is pretty good. And so if I can just one person I can stop, it's from taking that action, and the ripple effect it does to family and friends, it's all worthwhile.
Yeah, it's definitely an episode that resonated with me, from someone that had their own thoughts of suicide, and having spent time in a mental health hospital. It really does, even though I didn't, again, same like yourself, I didn't follow through with it. Seeing the impact that it had on other people, the worry that it put on people's mind, and seeing people cry, like my family and friends worrying about me, it really does go to show the impact that suicide can have on people, even if you don't follow through with it. And it is a episode that we went and covered the other side of suicide. Amelia, who unfortunately can't join us for this episode, she spoke about the impact of suicide because she lost her husband, and she wrote a beautiful book that is available on Amazon called Dirt and Dust, a teenage perspective on suicide, which is really good. So it was nice to kind of cover both sides, the thoughts of suicide, and then the people that have lost someone for suicide.
Those
left behind.
Yeah,
and so true what you say there. It's something that, I mean, suicide rate in the UK is enormous. I mean, it's high. It's not gender specific. It's high with both. I mean, it's high, even higher for men, though, that being said, than for women, and it's just not spoken about. So to have somebody, I think, that, I mean, after everything you went through, to openly speak about it, I think is so helpful for others, because it's really common, isn't it? People feeling suicidal and feeling like it, there's no point going on. And because there's no conversation around it, I guess it's really difficult for people to share it. People feel really isolated.
Yeah. So
to hear somebody, somebody who's been through everything that you've been through, talking openly, I think is really great.
Especially men. Especially with men. Men don't talk enough about mental health and suicide.
No.
And we are actually, the next person we're going to introduce actually came and spoke.
Well, one thing,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Jay, go on.
The next person we're going to introduce shortly, just after we finish talking to Daryl, is someone that actually came on and spoke about men and mental health. We'll just wrap up with Daryl, and we'll introduce our next guest speaker.
Was there something you wanted to, just before we do, was there something else you wanted to say, Daryl?
Yeah.
Yes. What you were saying, Mark, how it's helping others hearing me openly talk about it. And one thing encourages me, somebody did that for me. There was a police psychologist who was specifically introduced to me after the shooting, and he'd had his own life experience. And he was an Australian Vietnam veteran who tripped a booby trap in that war. He came back to Australia, Chris Mangfellow. He soldiered on in various training units for 3 years, but it got to the point that he resigned from the army, burned his uniform, burned his photographs, and just wanted to leave the horror of the Vietnam War behind him. And he could become dangerously suicidal, but he sought help. And then he went on to become a police psychologist. And the first thing he did with me was build trust. And then he was able to explain PTSD. I took it on board and I changed my mind. Well, I'm not crazy. I'm not a weak individual. This is, as Chris explained it, a normal reaction to a very abnormal event. So that little story about somebody else, spoke to me about their journey, and it was his lived experience that allowed us to break down the walls and then me open up. And so hopefully that talking about my experience and others thinking, well, if that copper, if he can go and seek mental health and get help and go on and live a flourishing life, I can do the same.
Yeah, I mean, has it led, I'm probably assuming the answer to this is yes, but has it led to a lot of conversations, people opening up to you, Dale, when you're doing your keynote speaking? People must share their stories with you, I imagine, all the time.
Exactly. I've just been in Toowoomba for the Toowoomba Regional Council, and I did face-to-face keynotes, and it was 2 a day over 3 days, so 6, and it was actually quite intense, but I just called on those resilience techniques, and one of them was just simply maximizing my sleep. But there were so many people afterwards who came up to me and shared their own stories and thanked me. And I said, look, one of the gentlemen had a serious brain injury from something flying into his head, and he had to be flown by a helicopter, and he talked about the dreams. And then, like me, the operations was a second trauma. And I even said to him, he followed up with an email, and I said, just people telling me about their own stories and about their flashbacks. Again, all these years later, 21 years after shooting, reminds me that when I'm out running and a car drives over a pizza box, and I jump out my skin and I have that hyperarousal, it's okay. That's just because of that experience, and that's just part of me now. I can calm down really quickly and go on. So you are absolutely correct that people come up, and then it's my turn to give them time to listen to them.
Yeah, the kind of whole paying it forward thing, it's really wonderful, isn't it? Yeah, and then I know we need to move on, Joe, but just to go back to what you were saying, Joe, it's important for everyone to talk about mental health, of course, but men talking about mental health is more unusual, and I think it's really important that men get to share things that are going on for them, to open up the wider conversations.
Yeah, so I want to, on the topic of men and mental health, and people obviously did the film a few years ago called Anxious Me, and it's a project that spoke about anxiety awareness, and a few of us, myself and Will, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, spoke about our mental health and spoke about anxiety, and it's a project that's had people come and talk to myself and other people that are in the film about mental health, and I'd like to introduce our next guest speaker. Will, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Will. Thanks for joining us. So just you joined. Well, actually, firstly, I want to ask what World Mental Health Day means to you.
That's a good question. I think really it's about learning about yourself, learning about what others have been through. I think what Daryl said earlier about the destigmatization, I think that's really what it comes down to. I mean, just to give you guys an idea, I've started doing Sober October this month. So this entire month I haven't been drinking alcohol. And I mean, I did it for a number of things. I noticed slightly that I was drinking a bit more. When I was drinking a bit more, I was getting a little bit more out of control. And I think a lot of this was coming down to obviously my own mental health issues that I'd had in the past with anxiety. And as I'm sure you're aware, with alcohol, whilst I'm not saying that you shouldn't drink it, but if you want to drink it, it's your choice. I think it's well known that it does exacerbate mental health issues. So I've started doing obviously Sober October, and I have to say I'm learning from it. I'm learning, actually, I didn't realize how much of an effect it could exacerbate obviously my own pre-existing mental health issues. And so I think really coming back to World Mental Health Day, that's what it means to me, is that it's just learning. You learn about yourself, you're doing new things, you're learning about others as well, because like I said, no story is the same. You don't know, like for example, with Daryl saying about getting shot, I didn't know about that, but obviously I've learned from that. I've learned what he's gone through. So yeah.
Yeah. And you've joined us for two projects now. You've joined us for Anxious Me, and you
hmm
joined us for the Men and Mental Health Revisited episode. You just talk about the episode that you did with us, and maybe just talk a little bit about Anxious Me.
Yeah, so I mean, overall, it was just as you said. It was just talking about this unfortunate belief that a lot of people have about boys don't cry, which is absolutely asinine. Boys do cry. I cry. And I believe every man here on this podcast has cried, maybe recently, maybe not so much. And I think it comes down to the fact that, unfortunately, I like macho, I like masculine things. I watch UFC, I watch boxing, I play rugby union, I'm into a lot of macho stuff. But guess what? I also have a sensitive side. And I think that's really what it's talking about. There's nothing wrong with talking about your sensitive side. There's a time and place for it, and you should know that you you know you should be able to talk about it when you feel you need to talk about it. And people, some people may not want to listen. There's a lot of people out there, idiots, who don't want to listen to it. Well, that's their choice. But I think a lot of men need to know that there is someone to listen. I said, me, Joe, I live 12,000 miles away from where you are. If you had an
Yeah.
issue, then you need to speak to me about. I'd be here for you. I mean, maybe something I haven't done too recently is that I've had some things where I need to speak about it to people, but I know that if I really need to speak to someone, I've got you, I've got other people, I've got my
Yeah.
family. I've got those people out there who I can speak to. There are people out there, and even if it is that you have no friends or family that you think you have to speak to about it, there are services out there who will listen to you, and they won't. They're not doing it for money. They're doing it because they volunteer. It's good. They're doing it because they care. They do it because they've been there before in the past, and I think
Yeah.
that's the most important thing. And that's the reason why I did Anxious Me, and I did World Mental Health Day. I do want to do these things because I want, if there is anyone out there listening right now, I just want to refer to them that boys do cry. It's okay to cry, and that you are more than happy to tell me how you're feeling, because I will listen, and other people will listen. So that's really what it is.
It's very beautifully put. I agree with what you say. We're kind of lucky that we have that friendship where we can talk openly about mental health without the fear of being judged. And quite a
Yeah,
few people in our friendship group we can talk to about mental health without the fear of being judged, because it is a bigger issue nowadays, and more people are experiencing mental health disorders, and especially with COVID. So it's very it's hard to put it into words. It's a topic that needs to be discussed about more in today's world, especially amongst men,
Hmm.
because it's not spoken about enough. And a lot of the statistics do point to men committed suicide more than females. And I'm not saying that's a general thing, but a lot of the statistics that I've read when I've done research for episodes, that men tend to commit suicide more than women because they have that fear of talking about their mental health. Um, and one of the questions I want to ask is, what made you want to come on the podcast and share your story?
I think, like as I said in the previous question, I wanted to tell my story because I know that there would be people out there who, whilst my mental health, like I said, I've never had issues with suicide or anything like that. So obviously you could argue that my stuff has not been as severe as others. It's still severe enough that it has affected my life. It has affected how I act. It's affected what I've done. I've lost friends because of my mental health episodes. And whilst it may just be anxiety or generalized anxiety disorder, it's still something where actually talking about it has helped a lot. And I wanted to go on this podcast because there are some people who may have moderate to not so severe symptoms, but it's still, that still isn't an option for them to keep quiet about it. You still should know that actually talking about it will still help. There is still things you can do, and that's a good thing.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, what you were saying, Will, about, kind of with this playing rugby and having, that side and being into really kind of macho things, but also allowing your sensitive side out in the world. I mean, that's a great message for men. I mean, there's so much. I think it's maybe slightly breaking down now, but, there's this whole toxic masculinity thing, isn't it? Men have got to be this, men have got to be that, men have got to be strong, men don't talk about their feelings, and I think because of that, I think men historically have felt a lot of shame really about opening up. But of course, men have mental health issues as well. Men have anxiety, men have depression, men have, everything. So it's really good, I think, that men are starting to open up and talk about it. It just normalizes it a bit, doesn't it? I think.
Yeah.
Mm.
And one of the things also, I think the fact that you did Anxious Me, which was about 3 years ago now, and then you came on the podcast, and we had this kind of, it was kind of a catch up episode with where you were mentally since the podcast. And your story in the podcast goes to show that mental health doesn't just disappear. It is a
No.
journey.
Mm.
You might get better, but it might always still be there. But it's a journey. It's always there. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things I liked about our episode, is the fact that you were open in both the film and the episode, and it goes to show that mental health is a journey.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm still at the beginning of my journey. I'm 28. I didn't really know about my mental health issues until probably about 24, 25 maybe, and I didn't really start to get help for it until this year. So I'm very much still just starting off. I'm only just taking my first couple of steps. It's very much a marathon or an ultra marathon, and I'm barely out the starting blocks, I feel. And that's something, you're right, I'm probably going to have to deal with this for the rest of my life, but I'm not scared. I'm not worried at all about that in the slightest. It's an issue, but, it's like people who are born with spina bifida, I don't know, or people who are born with cystic fibrosis. It's one of those things where you have to learn to live with it and you move on. There are some things which will happen to us later in life, like what happened with Daryl with his incident. There's some things that will happen from birth. Some people are born, with the incorrect chemical brain balance. It is one of those things, and I'm not scared at all, worried about it. I'm not feeling hard done by. That's life, but because I know I have a support group. I have people who love me, my parents, my family, my friends, people like yourself. So it is one of those ones, and it's just kind of those things where I just need to get myself into the correct position where I am able to deal with it. I'm still in that process, trying to find out, but I think I've made steps with it. I've made some big steps with it. So yeah.
And something
Very
we all
well
have
put.
to manage, isn't it? I mean, we all have. I mean, which episode was it, Joe, where one of our guests said, we all have mental health, and everybody has mental health, and we all have to learn to manage it. It's one of our video episodes, I think, wasn't it?
Oh,
Which
it's hard to
but
remember.
yeah,
It was
the
one
guy
of the
that
recent
trained to be a
ones.
psychotherapist.
Oh,
I can't
I'm
remember,
not sure.
but the message I thought was, we all have mental health, don't we? I mean, every single
Yeah.
person living on the planet has mental health, and I guess we, all of our journeys. I mean, we all manage our physical health, don't we? We as best we can. We try and eat healthily. We do this. We do that. It should be the same as mental health, isn't it? We all
Yeah.
need to do different things in order to manage our individual mental health. And that's a learning. We learn how to do it as we go on, and we kind of tweak it and maybe bring in different things. But it's a journey I think we all have to a greater or lesser extent.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I wanted to add as well, like Anxious Me, the film that we did with Will, has recently hit 900 views. I mean, it's taken time, and it did win a Film of the Month a few years ago for Australian Short Film Network. And it's good that a film with mental health's done so well, because you look at all these other films like The Avengers, films like Lord of the Rings stuff, they're always going to do well because they're fictional and they're these imaginary worlds where people can escape. But having films like Anxious Me, and there's a few other films that are out there about mental health, they're more realistic and more relatable. So having films like that do well will hopefully get the message out there that mental health is real. And I did want to say thank you to Will for taking part in that film, and the other two people that took part, and everyone that was kind of involved in the production, because without them, the film wouldn't have done as well as they did. And it was nice to have other people join me and kind of talk about their anxiety and their mental health, because it goes to show that there are people out there that want to listen. I've had family members come up to me since the film and say, thank you for doing the film because I have anxiety and I was scared to talk about it. And there's people that I didn't even know had mental health disorder, like mental health issues. And you just got to show the impact that a film about mental health can have. Did you want to ask Will any more questions before we move on to our next person, Mark?
No, I just wanted to say I really loved the film. I mean, I know I probably am a little bit biased, but I mean, I thought Anxious Me was a fantastic film. Really, really great film. And I'd really urge our listeners. I mean, how do our listeners watch it, Joe? How do they get hold of it?
It is on our YouTube channel. So if you search Lifestyle Multimedia, and then, or you can search Anxious Me. It is produced by Lifestyle. It was Lifestyle Productions at the time. Now Lifestyle Multimedia. It will be, the thumbnail will have a black screen with Anxious Me. Yeah, it's on our channel as well as our video episodes of our podcast and any other films we've done, including Anxious Me 2, which we did with Mark, which is something that I might touch on a bit later. But yeah, so if you haven't watched it already, go and check out on our YouTube channel. I'm forever ranting and raving about it as well because it's the first film I ever made. And let's move on to our next speaker, who I will now unmute. So I would like to introduce JL Keez, who joined us for, I'll double check the episode because I don't want to get the episode number wrong. He joined us for episode 14 and spoke about OCD. Thank you for joining us, JL. It's good to have you back.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
As I asked with Daryl and Will, what does World Mental Health Day mean to you?
Look, it's an opportunity for people to be able to engage perhaps in a range of different platforms that they might not otherwise have done. Like, for example, if this was done prior and it was put up today, you know, people might feel that they can come and do this privately and get some information back and then act upon the information that they hear from people who've got lived experiences. So I think that destigmatization, which the other two gentlemen have already mentioned as well, it puts it out into the arena as a much more normalised sort of thing that we can pursue and find answers for. So that's what I hope, you know, people would get out of it, and by acknowledging it and seeing it, you know, advertised and everything like that. So to me, it's just bringing normalisation to an illness that many, many people across the globe. I mean, if we break a leg, we sort of openly talk about a broken leg or a broken arm, but we don't talk about a broken person. And in the same vein or the same way. So hopefully something like this will encourage people to say, hey, you know, it's okay to talk about this. It's a normal, you know, it's an event that happens in too many people's lives, and we need to talk about it so that we can open doors to healing and recovery and knowledge and understanding and learning, as the other two have also suggested as well. So that's my response to that one for you.
Very briefly, and you joined us for the episode about OCD. You mentioned in the episode that you no longer suffer from it. Can you just tell us a little bit about the OCD when you had it and what you do now, as we asked the other two?
Well, with OCD was one of many mental. I mean, I started out with an eating disorder with anorexia nervosa. And as a result of that and not healing, a lot of other associated mental illnesses sort of joined me on my way before recovery came through my door. And OCD was one of them. This one joined me when I became pregnant with my first child. And all of a sudden I started rechecking and doing this and not being able to sleep before something got done. And I just really didn't know what was happening to me at all. And because I think I'm quite a bit older than all you gentlemen there. So back in my day, we didn't have any awareness or knowledge of anything, you know, that we're able to share in this day and age. So I sort of suffered and went through that for that 9 months, and then had Brad, and sort of hormonally hoped that it would all settle down again, which it didn't do. And it kept on going. And then I was pregnant with my second child, with my daughter, and it got worse and deepened to, you know, locking and refolding and smoothing down things and all of those, and rechecking in my head and all of the rest of the stuff that went with it. And that wasn't really given a name and a label until I lived in Melbourne, Victoria at the time, or a place called Little River on 10 acres. And we came back to Adelaide, and I went to Flinders Medical Centre here. as an outpatient for eating disorders, actually. And that's when I was sharing with this person, look, I didn't used to do this and now I'm doing all of this. And that's when that label came to me. And I said, well, what's OCD? And so, yeah, I went on like that probably for about 10 years or so until one day it just came into my head. I was so tired of how I was living. And as anyone else suffering OCD, it's an exhausting thing, like suicide, depression, anxiety. All of them are absolutely exhausting. And it just came into my head one day to just, as soon as the thought came in that then perpetuated the behavior that went with the OCD, if I could stop that thought in its tracks and just completely clear my mind and then count to 30 out loud and focus on the numbers and almost visualizing 1, 2, 3, 4, and then getting to 30, if I then revisited that thought that created the behavior, it just had no power over me. And the first time, and I don't know why, it was just something that came to me, and so I followed it through. And when it didn't happen, I went, that's a bit cool. Yay. And it still probably took, a few more months to actually nail it and completely get rid of it. But having had that first successful experience, I went, hey, there's something in this. And so I kept doing it. And every time I wanted to refold the towels, I would stop, count to 30, and it didn't happen. And then I also added it by adding already pre-prepared activities, I suppose. When I felt that OCD coming over, if I immediately, back here in Adelaide, we lived on 2 acres. So if I shot out the back door straight away and started walking around my 2 acres or whatever, or down the street, and just really focused on that word called mindfulness, really focused on my garden, or, distracted myself with something else, when I came back to the cupboard, I didn't have to refold those towels. So there were a couple of things that I just sort of created from nowhere, really, that eventually gave me my power back in terms of OCD, and eventually it left me. And, I know Darren was talking about suicide, and I just can't imagine what I've been through, and a lot of people do, and they just should take their hat off to me if I can say that on this platform, because it sounds a bit big-headed. But when I listen to your story, Darren, I think, far out, I'm about to have 2 lots of reconstruction for cancer being cut out my face. I'm just hiding it here at the moment. And I'm thinking, how did you go through the number that you did? And your face would have been a lot worse than what mine is. So hat off to you for enduring that and going through all of that. But I do understand suicidal depression, because I lined the tablets up and I wanted to leave, and because it got that bad as well. But I gradually brought the ideology that I had with OCD into that one, and into anxiety, and I had chronic fatigue, and I had, migraines and all of those things as well. And gradually with suicidal depression, the way I got out of that one, I used to go to bed fine and get up at about 2 and be in the depths and just want to cut my head off. And I'd go outside and pace around the backyard and, eventually come back to bed, get back to sleep, and it'll be completely gone in the morning. And then eventually I thought, you know what, I'm going to turn this around. So I'd go out back and I'd say, right, you're here with me again. What message do you want to give me? Suicidal, and I would make up and have these conversations with suicidal depression and say, what do you want me to learn? What are you telling me about me? What did I endure as a child growing up, or whatever? What are you related to in my life? And gradually the answers came, and I had a great psychologist who practiced that way, or that line of thinking. And so I adopted in that arena as well. And eventually suicidal depression left me as well. So that's probably a long answer to your question. But with OCD, I saw that advertised, when you advertise for somebody to come on, and I thought, gosh, that's one aspect of me that I haven't actually opened up and talked about. And a lot of people, when I said, look, I've just been on this great podcast, I talked about, why'd you talk about OCD? Didn't you just have an eating disorder? No, I had all these other things as well. And a lot of people aren't aware of that. So for me, it was a wonderful opportunity to share my experience and my story, but hopefully give people an idea of how they might be able to combat it in a similar way that I did. So it was great that I was accepted and got the opportunity to do that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure a lot of people found the episode beneficial and relatable. And it does go to show, like, as you mentioned, there are things that people might not know about you. Myself, like I've had anxiety and depression for years, and only recently got diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. So it does go to show there are things that people might not know about you. You might not know that you've got yourself. I wanted to ask what made you want to come on the podcast?
For that reason, to be able to have the opportunity to share. And I think mental health is so misunderstood as well. And I think that's one of the reasons we don't talk about it, because it is so misunderstood. And for far too long, it's been, oh, just pull yourself together, you'll be fine. But until you experience it yourself, and you realize how real it is, no one can appreciate it. You know, people who've never experienced this cannot appreciate the debilitation that it creates in your life. So, and I have done a lot of podcasts, around the globe, but mainly on eating disorders. But as I said previously, with OCD, I went, that's another area that I would like to be able to weave my way into and offer some hope and some support, particularly if people have been battling with it for a number of years and they still can't get on top of it. There might just be something that I've said. They go, hey, I haven't thought of it or looked at it that way. I'll adopt that into my my thinking and see what that can do for me. So that was the main thing, to really get these voices, all of our voices out there into the world, to say, hey, just like, and I know you're all, well, I'm the only woman here tonight, so I have to sort of agree with you that men don't talk about it much, but women do tend to sit down and have a cup of tea and, cry and get their words out of their mouths much more than men. So, and just support these people, because too often, oh, she's got anxiety, or she's got OCD, or she's got suicidal depression. People tend to, navigate their way away from those people. Yeah. They don't want to know them. And it's that lack of understanding and knowledge as to how and why that's happened for that person in the first place that sees people respond in that way. And it's almost alert behaviour across our globe as well, over too many years where that's been the way to react and respond. So
yeah, it's
yeah,
good.
I mean, that
good.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Jay.
Yeah, it's good to have you on as well, to kind of have that female perspective about mental health, because we've spoken a lot about men and mental health and how men don't talk about it. So it's nice to kind of have that female perspective to say that females sort of more openly talk about their issues and these sort of topics than men do. Mark, what did you want to ask?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to just bring in the eating disorder as well.
Yeah.
Because this is so, OCD is really OCD is so common. People really struggle with it, and it is absolutely exhausting for people. But likewise, eating disorders are incredibly common, and these again are not gender specific. I mean, there's so much pressure on women in society, and so a lot of women have eating disorders, but increasingly I think men are starting to develop eating disorders, or certainly be more open about eating disorders. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about that. It's something we didn't really particularly cover in the podcast, but I'm really interested to hear a bit more.
Well. And your book as well.
And the book,
So anything in particular about eating disorders, or just general?
Well, just anything you think would help our listeners, to be honest.
Your experience, and probably talk about your experience, and maybe just a little bit about what the book is about that you've written.
Yeah, okay. So having anorexia nervosa at the age of 15 to 24, and as I said, being older back then, it just wasn't a known entity at all. It didn't even really have a name until I was 24, and the paperwork was put in front of me, and I could connect to the pictures that were there and the dialogue that was shared in the text as well. And I think with eating disorders, it is one of the ones that, we talk about suicide, but in terms of eating disorders, that has a high suicide, a statistic attached to it. And I think there's still a lot, just with my experience, I guess, and going through it myself, and then watching how it's handled in the world today. And I acknowledge that there's a lot of ways of actually approaching it to help people heal. But I think with any of these, one of the big things that I would like to encourage people that have mental issues of any nature or any sort is, when you are doing your research, who can I connect with? Who can I source to help myself? If you can find someone that's had the lived experience, that just makes it so much easier. I know with clients that I have, and at the moment I've set up a 10-week, and I know it will go longer than that, a 10-week Zoom for people with eating disorders to educate, the why of it. Why has this come into my life? Why am I experiencing this? And these are the questions that I wasn't asked. It was just put on weight and you'll be fine. Well, I put on the weight and I wasn't fine. I went down all the other roads of mental illness that were attached, down the track. And so my advice, and I feel like I'm moving all over the place, sorry, but first of all, find someone with lived experience. They'll really understand you. I was going to say about my client in New York, she's in her early 40s now, and she's been struggling, since childhood because of the cultural background, everything associated with that. I know she's just really enjoying, working with someone with the lived experience, but also the therapy, I guess, that I utilize as well. It's new to her, and this is what worked for me as well. And with eating disorders, any of these, dive into your story. The answers and the clues are in your story there as to why this has manifested now in your life. And those answers and clues will give you your road out as well, if you are prepared to do the hard slog and the hard work, as I'm hearing Darren. And sorry, I've forgotten the other gentleman's name,
Bill.
But I can appreciate Bill as well, the journey that you've just started, Bill, and Darren, you've been on for quite a while. And I would have jumped off that bridge too so many times when I wanted to jump off bridges. But just find that person that you really, really connect and trust, as Darren pointed out. Make sure you feel trust and connection with the person that you're dealing with it. Also accept that there is a mental illness component with eating disorders. It's not about food and weight. It's about your story and what your story has given to you, what events in it that remain unresolved or whatever, that have seen the body. For me, I got to the age of 15, the body went, seriously, we can't keep doing this. So crash, bang, down I went into an eating disorder. And had people known right then to ask those important questions, it wouldn't have gone on for 9 years and I wouldn't have got as sick as I did. So for anybody with any illness, particularly eating disorders, because that's my biggest field, look at your story, look for your clues, and be prepared to do the hard work of returning to who you are, not why you are. So another long answer, sorry.
And what's the name of your book that you released?
My book I wrote is called Anorexia Unlocked, Understanding Your Story Through Mine. And I wrote that last year. I wrote it in a month. I always say that to people because I'm a little bit proud, because everyone goes, a month? You did it in a month? Far out. And so I've always got to tell everybody that. But anyway, and I published it in November, and it's getting really good feedback. And don't be fooled by the title. I think if I went back now, I'd probably do a different title, because I think people I'm going to go in and get all the steps, and by the end of the book I know how to get well. It's actually a 3-part book, and the first part is my story, and it just lays the foundations over my life until I was about 38, when I finally began the healing journey, really true healing journey, so that people can get a glimpse of who I am and what I endured and what I suffered, and the whole story behind, Jenny Lee. And I wasn't Jenny Lee at the time. I changed my name when I turned 40. And so that's embedded in it. And why did I do that? And then the middle part is 14 pearls of wisdom. So everything that I've learned and taken from all those years of enduring. And then the last part is just, this is my story. This is what happened. This is, I changed my thinking, changed my behavior, did a little whoop, and I spat out at the other end. It's just sort of a wrapping up overall. And why did I write it? Because people asked me to write it. So many people knew my story and said, it will help many, as Darren's and Will's will as well. And yours, Joe and Mark, I shouldn't leave you out of that list. And so a lot of encouragement, because I thought it was going to take a long time to write. But I'm so glad I've written it, because so many people have already been helped by it, to be able to make that connection and see the commonality of their lives as to what mine was like as well. So, that's my book.
Thank you. Well, thank you for sharing your story again and chatting about the book. We will get back to our 3 guests in a little bit and ask them about their favourite bit of advice for mental health. As you guys know, we host, myself and Mark host the podcast, and obviously we interview guests like every episode, but we've also being a mental health podcast host, we've also shared our own stories. I just want to ask Mark a little bit about the episode he did. You did an episode on HSPs, which is highly sensitive people, and you showed your story. So I want to ask you what World Mental Health Day means to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think World Mental Health Day is, so important for just to, get discussions going around mental health, to get people to focus on mental health, to take away, the stigma. It's just, it's just another way, to encourage people to talk about mental health openly, thus, hopefully taking away the stigma, normalizing it. So it's an important day. I mean, mental health is important every day, of course, but World Mental Health Day, just bringing it to the attention of the public, I think is important.
Yeah, and can you just talk a little bit about the episode you did as well?
Yeah, I mean, HSP, highly sensitive people, it's something I work with a lot. I'm an HSP. I went through most of my life not realizing that, and looking at kind of bits of my behaviour and thinking, goodness, I don't really understand why I'm like that, and I'm perhaps different to other people. Perhaps more sensitive, perhaps get affected by things more deeply. Kind of have quite a lot of empathy for for people, which is a good thing. But it can also be quite difficult because there's quite a lot of suffering in the world, and when when you're very, very open to the suffering of others, I think it can have quite a massive effect. And you have to try and boundary that, because there is so much suffering in the world. And I just came across a book by Elaine Aron. It's quite an old book written in 1997. She's somebody that was the first person to bring this into the public domain. She did a lot of research around HSPs. It's a personality type shared by 20% of the population, although when I first started working with HSPs, there was nothing out there. There was Elaine Aron's work and there was nothing else. I mean, she continues to do fantastic work. And if you're an HSP, I'd really encourage you to kind of pick up on one of her books. She's written quite a lot. And for me, I think it was really important to talk about it and share my own personal experience. Because again, I think when people can kind of, can hear others talking about character traits, mental health issues, things that perhaps they experience in their own lives, then I think it can lead them to find out more, really. And I think with HSPs, often HSPs will go through their lives and they won't realize what's going on. And then at some point they'll come across something and it'll be like an epiphany. So I think, with HSPs, highly sensitive people, I think the more conversations are out there, again, the more it gets normalized, the more people that have the characteristics can understand them rather than kind of questioning what's going on with them. So I think it was important, it's always important, I think, to share personal experience. So so going into the show, I shared a bit of my own personal experience, which hopefully can be helpful to other HSPs.
Yeah, and you've done your own video blog as well, haven't you? Called #Psychotherapy Unfogged. And you did an episode on HSPs, didn't you? And you've done some other episodes. Where can our listeners find them?
Yeah, so they can find them on some of my sites. I've got a website, markfieldingpsychotherapy.com. I've also got some counselling directory sites, and I've got a YouTube channel, #Psychotherapy Unfogged. And I talk. There's quite a long episode on HSPs. It's quite a fledgling podcast. I've talked about COVID. I've talked about kind of anxiety on it. So if anyone listeners want to hear more, then please do go to the podcast and have a listen.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark, for sharing again, and for hosting for the whole of season 1 and the episodes we've done so far for season 2. So obviously hosting the webinar and hosting the podcast, and I've asked all you guys about what World Mental Health Day means for you, and for me, again, I agree with everyone else that it's about learning, about destigmatizing mental health, getting the word out there about mental health. I love that there's all these days and stuff that raise awareness of mental health and stuff like Suicide Awareness Day, and Are You Okay Day. And it kind of, in a way it's good and in a way it's bad. I feel like it shouldn't just be a day that there needs to be a day to do these sort of things. I think it should be every day. There should be awareness of mental health. And myself, I did an episode on borderline personality disorder, which was a recently diagnosed mental health disorder that I was diagnosed with in the last 3 years. And it came as a surprise, but at the same time came as no shock to me that I had borderline personality disorder. A lot of it made sense. Some of the symptoms or some of the signs of it were quite similar to, because I was diagnosed with dyspraxia as a young child, which is motor growth skills and emotional stuff. Some of it I thought was related to that when I was having these mood swings that were going from 0 to 100. So being diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, it was nice to share my story on an episode. And also, because we tried to do the episode when we did the video podcast, and a lot of the people when I did the shout out were mistaking it for bipolar disorder, which is something that a lot of people know about. So borderline personality disorder is not something a lot of people talk about, and we didn't have much response when I applied for did a shout out for guests. So I thought I'd use it as an opportunity to share my story. And as with the podcast, I really want there to be a platform for people to have something to relate to, something that will encourage them to talk about their mental health. And we've had so many amazing guests on in the whole of season 1, and even with season 2 now. And I really want to use this as an opportunity to thank the guests for coming on and enabling us to do these podcast episodes, and having shared your story with everyone. I'm glad that's out there now for people to relate to, and hopefully encourages other people to share their stories. We have a lot of exciting things lined up. Planning. I'll keep it keep it quiet for now, but we have a lot of exciting things coming this way, your way, for our listeners and people that haven't listened to the podcast already. Please do go and listen to it. We're nearly at 1,000 plays, which is something that we probably never dreamed of when we first started the podcast. And I want to wrap up this webinar by going to each of our speakers and asking their favorite bit of advice. I'll start with Mark. Mark, what's your favorite bit of advice for people with mental health, or in relation to your topic that you discussed on your episode?
Yeah, particularly in relation to HSPs, Joe.
Or in general, whatever you feel's best.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I do, but I mean, I think in relation to HSPs, I mean, this is probably HSPs are really only going to understand this, but I guess with HSPs, I think, it's a gift to have, a really, really, immense capacity for empathy. But I think learning to boundary, I think, is really important, because, you need to live your own life as well, using coping strategies that are going to help that. And I think generally, I have to say, opening up and talking to people, opening up and talking to people, I think when you're suffering is the most important thing. It really, really helps. They might not have an answer, they might not be able to sort it out for you, but I think just the act of opening up and sharing, I think, is immensely therapeutic. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. And Daryl, your favorite bit of advice in relation to mental health and suicide?
Don't ignore the 800-pound gorilla in the room. If you're worried about somebody, just ask them openly, are you thinking about ending your life? And if they say yes, just stay with them and then contact a mental health professional. And you can change the course of that person's life. People worry, what do I do if they say yes? And that's happened to me. And just stay with them. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. And I said, do you mind if I reach out and to a mental health service for you? And or do you happy for me to accompany you to your local GP? And that is, I think, going to help a lot of people, because they're worried. What happens if they say yes? Well, it's not on you. You just stay with them and guide them to the source of help.
Yeah. I think, that's very beautiful. And Will, you unmute yourself for favorite bit of advice for mental health?
My advice would be to the people who obviously deal with mental health or who are suffering from it. Just don't be afraid to speak to someone. A bit like what Daryl was saying. So you reach out to someone you're worried about. Well, if you are the worried person, reach out to others. If you feel, yeah, I know it's easier said than done. Trust me, I've been there. But best thing you can do is, yeah, just reach out to someone, whether it's a friend, a family, someone you trust. If there is no one you can trust in that sense, then please go to obviously some of the great mental health charities, which in the United Kingdom and in Australia and most of the modernized world we're very blessed to have. Because it is better once as you said, you let it out. Well, you don't let it inside you. You don't keep it inside you. Once you let it out, it is going to be much better for yourself. And also another one as well, obviously from what I've seen in the last couple of weeks with myself, obviously doing sober October. Think twice about the stuff you put in your body. Like I said, I'm not saying don't stop drinking or anything like that. I just said I was very much almost naive to how much alcohol exacerbated my own exacerbate my own anxieties. It really does, and it does quite a lot. And I have to say, it's been quite nice having these last couple of weeks not having to worry about drinking. Like I said, I was at the rugby on Friday, 15,000 people there to watch Harlequins destroy Bristol. Honestly, wonderful game. And I didn't drink, and I also found out I could have fun without drinking. And it's actually a really interesting thing. So that's what I'd say. Don't be afraid to speak to someone. Do speak to someone if you have issues, and also just think twice about maybe some of the stuff you put in your body.
Perfect, thank you, Rob. And JL?
First of all, apologies to Daryl because I've been calling you Darren. And I've just realised you're not Darren, you're Daryl. So I apologise for that. Look, as I've already indicated before, anyone suffering with any mental health, when you're researching for that credible person that you feel can help you, have they had lived experience? And that person, when you do approach them, ask them about how they're going to work with you. What's your line of therapy? What can I expect, when I'm connecting with you? What can I expect to see and experience with you? Because that was a huge difference in my pathway. I'd been to so many different psychologists, and all of the rest of it. And it was the one who said to me, I want to hear your story. I want to look at your thoughts. I want to look at your behaviors. I want to look at your emotions, and I want to look at what your physical symptoms in your body are doing and what information we can gather from each of those areas of you that will give us clues as to what you need to recover from. And then added to that, your needs and your wants and your beliefs and your values, because each of those categories of your life will give you answers that you can work on and employ to help you recover from your mental health issues. And the primary one and the huge one that I had to really acknowledge in my recovery was the relationships that I had been involved in or, had throughout my life. And I needed to go back to my childhood and have a look at, my childhood and how I was raised and my parents and the connection and the relationship with them, and then see how other relationships reflected that one and my responsibility in it, but also stepping back and looking at and taking on their responsibility and the damage that had been done. So you need to be prepared to open up every area of your life and to cry and to be honest and to speak your truth without hiding anything from that person, so that, you can move forward. And there is help, out there as well. So that would be my response to that question of yours, Joe.
Thank you, JL. And I think since everyone else has done it, something that I always say, my favourite bit of advice, as you all said, speak to someone. There will always be someone there to talk to, even if it's a stranger, a family member, a friend, a psychologist, a doctor. Myself, my own personal mental health journey, I've always found speaking to someone helps massively. And as the title of the podcast says, you're never alone. And I really hope that the episodes we've done with everyone here and the ones that unfortunately couldn't join us have helped at least one person out there to speak up and share their journey and share their story and get the help that they need. I'd like to say thank you to everyone for joining us for this webinar. It's our first one, and it's been an absolute pleasure doing it with you. being joined by you all
you.
and hearing your stories again, and hearing what World Mental Health Day means to you all. And I want to say thank you to our listeners, and hopefully we can do an event like this again soon. And everyone just follow the advice given by everyone here. We've all got our own lived experience. We've all been through it. So who better than us to give you the advice, to guide you guys. Thank you, everyone. And stay tuned for episode 7, which will be released next week. We'll be talking about animal assisted therapy. And I want to say thank you to all the guests that joined us for season 1, and for making it as successful as it's been, and as popular as it's been, and getting us to where we are. And hopefully we'll reach 1,000 plays soon. And thank you again to Mark for helping host.
Always a pleasure, Jane.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thank you for joining us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great to see
Yeah.
you all
Having
again.
us.
Thank you so much.
Bye.